Let's.
Thank you, Ashutosh, and the esteemed panelists for an insightful discussion from ideas to insights, what's working, what's not working, to impact through a drug discovery, through diagnostics, or through devices. Thank you, everybody. I also appreciate the patience from the panelists. There was a small confusion between fireside chat and panelists, but really appreciate the patience from the panelists. I would like to move on to the second panel, uh, to be led by Dr. Nishit Doshi. Dr. Nishit Doshi is currently an international business leader at Roche. Doshi is an expert in combining technology with AI and has authored several patents and research articles with more than 3,000 citations. His strong scientific background in UCSB also demonstrates his success in other fields. Nishit will moderate the second session on digital health. Welcome, Nishit.
Everyone, can you hear me okay? Excellent. So every conference that I go to these days, every company pitch that I have been listening in the last few months, every LinkedIn feed that I go to is incomplete without AI, right? I'm sure you all are also probably experiencing that. So how can we have an EPPICon conference without an AI session, right? So that's what this session is about. We're going to talk about health AI, but we will do it slightly differently. We will try to make it very real. Uh, I'm going to introduce Dr. Matt Lungren. He's one of the leading authorities in the field. He's going to help us debunk some of the myths that are associated with AI. He's going to help us distinguish what is real from what the hype is. He's also going to help us with laying down the different breadth of different use cases that can be enabled through this exceptional technology. We will then do a panel discussion. So we'll start with a fireside chat. We are then going to do a panel discussion where we will dive deeper into specific healthcare domains. So we will start with medical devices. We will also do some biopharma use cases like drug discovery based on AI. How can we improve commercialization of drugs using AI? So we'll dive into all of those details and much more. But before I go into those details, maybe a quick show of hands in terms of whether maybe there are senior leaders at your company. Maybe you are a senior leader who is asking to implement AI in your organization, or you have been asked by your senior leader to implement AI in your organization. Maybe a quick show of hands here, right? And just the number of hands, it sort of shows that how important this is in terms of learning about how can we incorporate this technology into our use cases. Okay, so with that, let me welcome Dr. Matt Lungren. He's the Chief Data Science Officer at Microsoft. Matt, if you can quickly come to the stage, please. I'm going to have a little bit of a word of caution here. As I introduce Matt, it's going to be a long introduction. That's because he wears so many different hats. He's the Chief Data Science Officer at Microsoft. He's also an adjunct professor at Stanford, where he led the Center of Excellence for AI in Medical Imaging. He's also a practicing interventional radiologist, pediatric interventional radiologist at UCSF. He has created courses so that a layman can understand how AI can be implemented in healthcare. These courses you can find on Coursera. He has tons of publications with more than 20,000 citations, and the list goes on and on. So please welcome Matt.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, maybe you
over here. Oh, good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the introduction. Here?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
So comfortable. Nice. At Stanford, they just give you a stool. This is nice.
Yeah. So Matt, maybe what we can do is we can maybe start by tell us the audience a little bit about your journey. I introduced you as a physician, also a chief data science officer as a tech company. These two usually don't go together. So how did you transition from a physician to now in big tech, from academia to industry? And what were some of the motivations?
Yeah, well, I mean, how much time do we have for that? My journey's sort of long, but it is a bit unusual. I think part of it's, actually, I credit Stanford's culture probably for a lot of my, the change in sort of my perspective on things. I came to Stanford as a faculty in 2014 as my first faculty job out of training, and wasn't so sure about it, right? My expensive area to live, I didn't know anybody here, but I was really interested in public health, and so during my residency training, I had gathered large data sets, population level data sets, and um, a lot of the labeling and the work I was doing to analyze it was manual, or very simple tools, right? And I remember talking to someone from the computer science department at one of these conferences. I'm like, is there anybody over there that can help me like with this problem? I really want to dig into this a little bit better. And he's like, well, why don't you go over, there's the Gates building, tell me what that was. And I was like, what's that? And so I actually, this is true, after a shift, I still had my scrubs on and everything. I walked over to the Gates building, remember this vividly. There's no one there, except there was light under one door. And I walked up to the door and, knocked on the door, and opened the door, and Andrew Ng's there. And I didn't know Andrew Ng. I had no idea who he was, no idea he was famous. And I just said, hey, I'm a physician. I really have these really interesting data sets. I want to do something more. And I've heard all you guys know about this AI thing, and it turned out it was right at the right time. It was right when deep learning was really, big. Fei Li's ImageNet was really helping us do a lot more in computer vision, as you know. And so that kind of kicked off a really long collaboration. So for almost 10 years now, we've collaborated off and on. And I like to think I taught him some things about healthcare, but he certainly taught me a lot about AI over the years. And so as my career kind of progressed, I started the large center. We brought in lots of industry money, spun out some startups. A couple got acquired, which is really cool. And then did my sabbatical after tenure with Microsoft and fell in love. So here I am.
Yeah, what an inspiring story. I think my takeaway from this is don't be scared to knock on the door.
I think that's a really good lesson. I often tell students who kind of ask, wait, how do I do something different? It's kind of about surface area to me. Like, what are your day-to-day interactions? Are you in this like similar pattern of the same people every day, day after day? If that is true, then you might be able to predict where your life's going to be in 10 years. And I don't like that feeling. I like to know that I have no idea what I'm going to be doing in 10 years. That's just personal, but part of that surface area for sure. Yeah.
Matt, I started this introduction by saying there is so much hype around AI. It's difficult to escape. Maybe help the audience a little bit, to distinguish where there is a lot of hype versus reality. So just a few examples that we hear in the field, right? It's everything from operational use cases like clinical documentation to, your AI is going to give you decision support to physicians to make clinical decisions to, oh, there is going to be a nurse for every chronic patient, and to other things like, hey, there's going to be a bot that will look at your wrist after your surgery and tell you if you're recovering well or not. Tell us, how do we think about what is more real and now versus what the potential is in the future?
Yeah, and I guess I've only lived through one of the many hype cycles. So this, I guess, is technically the second. But it used to be when I gave talks with for my research, it was always, when are doctors going to get replaced and all that? And you'd have this answer that you would give, right? It's going to augment, not replace. And that was kind of our mantra for a long time. And a lot of the reasons we said that were things like, we had no idea how to have a bot that could truly interact in a way that felt human, that had some semblance of empathy, that could learn on the fly, right? None of those things, that was all science fiction, right? So, but now I think there are some, very interesting truths underneath the hype that, I consistently see. I think what I usually tell folks when I give these talks, I show a slide. And if you can picture in your head, I'm going to try to describe this with my words. Picture an exponential curve, okay? And that's kind of where the technology seems to be going without any sign of slowing down. But then also picture a linear line, and that's us. And for a long time, that exponential curve was below that linear line. So we could sort of feel as though we knew how to plan We knew where the technology was in relationship to our technology and the use cases that we were accustomed to. But that's starting to separate a lot. So where you plan to be, where I plan to be, even where those of us who are in, sort of the community plan to be, is still far away from where the technology is actually today. And that's very disorienting. And so when you hear these like sparks of hype, like it can do X, Y, Z, I think some of that comes from a place of the technology is actually quite a bit further. It's just the applications and our ability to, harness it and use it in a real world setting. It's not quite there. Where I do get a little bit, and I talk about this a lot, where when we say these models are, as good as doctors, I think a lot of that's based on bad benchmarking. And it's not the fault of those that are looking at those benchmarks, because, yes, the USMLE is a test, a multiple choice test that we study a lot for those of you who are physicians in the room, this. Very difficult test, and it is truly what we use to determine competency for independent practice, right? And these models have essentially saturated that benchmark. Does that mean that we can now send them out and replace, competent medical practitioners? No, that's not what and then we can get into many reasons why. But that hype is actually caused, in my mind, I think, by bad benchmarks. And there's many examples of that. And I'm guilty of that too. Like when we were first doing deep learning in healthcare, we did our best at coming up with a benchmark, but it's not the ground truth all the time. And so we tend to get a little bit taken away by that hype. At the same time, the fact that a model that wasn't trained to do that task, which is what's interesting, can do that task. And there's examples of complex medical cases. There's complex reasoning that you can have these few shot or RAG-based interactions with the model, and it does impressively well. That means that there's internal representations that somehow this model has learned, and that's the emergent behaviors theory, if you buy into that. And that, this is a cheap way to deliver those medical concepts in a variety of applications. So you referenced some of the applications that we have. The most probably visible is the DAX Copilot solution, right? Which is this ambient note generation. Now, you might say that's not that hard, right? It's not hard to take a conversation between a patient and a doctor in words, okay? And then transform that into a note that they can quickly edit and sign with very low error rates so doctors aren't, frustrated. If you had given my lab that task 6, 7 years ago, I would have told you it's going to be several million and maybe I'll get you a few use cases where it'll work and it's going to break a lot. That's literally what I would have said to you, knowing where NLP was at the time. The fact that we can do this now at scale, thousands of physicians are using this every day. They're saving hours, their burnouts. So this is incredible. And I think there is evidence, but I think what I often say is that when you don't realize that, when you don't put AI in the solution and it's being used, that's when AI is adopted, right? If you have to push the AI side, it's kind of a red flag for me. But nonetheless, the hype, I think, is somewhat disconnected, partially due to the benchmarks, but there are real world applications, in particular in the administrative side, which I know we want to get into. Where are the high value, low risk things that we do in healthcare, and are those valuable? Now, I get hundreds of people over the years coming up to me, got a cool startup idea. Oftentimes, if there's not a domain expert in the mix, it's I want to do something diagnosis, right? I want to do automated, nursing, whatever it is. And then I sort of tap on this sign. I always say, of the $1 trillion we spend every year in this country on administrative part of healthcare, $1 trillion a year. And you're telling me that's not a high value, low risk place to start applying some of this technology? I'd say you're crazy. And this doesn't put patients' lives at risk. It actually helps us have a less friction-filled health system, right? And so that's where I like to spend a lot of my time, is how do I really just, particularly as a physician who clicks 19 times to do a one patient visit, how do I get that out of my way and let me practice at the top of my license? The other things will come. As I said, we're on this exponential curve. There are things out there that are kind of spooky to someone who considers myself a domain expert and a good physician. But right now, I'm really just concerned with how do we focus in the communities like this on eliminating the administrative headache that we have in any healthcare system, but particularly in the US.
Yeah, that's it. Especially the clinical documentation use case that you said. As a husband of a physician, I can tell you that it will not only bring joy to the physicians, but also their spouses.
I mean, I've literally had situations to that point where, docs were like, right. You all know the burnout statistics. They're kind of sobering, right? I mean, we all are going to be patients if you're not already. Who's going to take care of us? If our doctors are burned out, they do less well. If they're busy and distracted and multitasking, they do less well. And if they retire early, we lose the opportunity to have our, a great physician workforce, and nurses and others all fall into this category. So,
Yeah.
but to see that folks are saying, you know what, I was going to retire, but because they did this and I tried it out and I love it, I'm gonna stay.
Yeah.
That's all. That's like the best endorsement of a technology that I could ask for. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's shift gears a little bit into myth busting. So if you look at how technology has evolved, let's say since the 90s, we initially had the internet, then we had operating system players who sort of became the biggest platforms. Then we started having internet applications like Google and Metas of the world. Same thing happened with the mobile technology. First you had hardware, so new mobile devices, they became platforms. Then we had app stores, and then mobile applications, Netflixes of the world and Ubers of the world. This revolution is being compared almost to the internet revolution, or even going back to the electricity revolution in some cases, right? Tell us a little bit about the value chain. When I look at the value chain, there is companies that are providing the compute power. There is companies that are building these models. And then there are companies that are building applications in specific areas. Some myths that currently I hear is, oh, the model creators are going to take all the value. But tell us a little bit about, how you are seeing this. Another myth that I very frequently hear is the next model is going to be so good that you will not have to train it at all. So tell us a little bit about, are these myths, or how real are these things? Yeah.
On the value chain side, well, as you guys, you did not hear MBA in the introduction, so take anything I say here with a grain of salt. But certainly from the research side, we see incredible capabilities that do call into question the way that we do things today, right? I mean, do I need to have 30 applications on my phone? Do I need to interact with them? Is that UI super important? And as you've seen with some of the demos with the very low latency voice capabilities, can I just start using a higher bits per second, as we like to say, interaction? Is typing with my thumb. My teenage daughter, she's really fast. She's probably faster at typing with her thumbs than her using her voice, but I'm not, right? And so could I just start to get to a place where I interact with the software world in a completely different way? I think that that's a pretty safe bet to make. How that changes the value equation, I think, depends on whether the existing software incumbents can harness this technology in a way that takes advantage of that, or risk being abstracted away. I think that's definitely an active discussion. Certainly, on the side of compute, there is definitely value to be gained there, and but that also means that there's new opportunities, right? Like Bezos used to say, "Your margin is my opportunity," right? So, what is the opportunity there? You're seeing all these startups now into the chip space, particularly the inferencing space, which I'm very excited to see, right? The competition is certainly healthy. I also feel that that's true in the number of startups that I've seen. I mean, I know we've always had a very healthy startup ecosystem in Silicon Valley, but I don't think I've ever seen anything like what I see now. And it's not the typical I need 30 engineer situation. We're seeing things like GitHub Copilot and some of these solutions making 1 or 2 engineers operate at the level of a full business unit, right? These are this is healthy, I think, for the whole ecosystem, and then ultimately the market, as we like to say, will decide. But to your point about, does the next model just wipe out all the things that you do in the community to use this technology today as it exists? No one knows, right? I mean, there's certainly a lot of lofty expectations. There's bordering on science fiction level hyperbole, but at the end of the day, no one truly expected, except for maybe 4 or 5 people, the kinds of jumps that we've seen with the exponential increase in scale, right? So but even if you ignored that for the moment and you took what's happening now with the 4 model, which is now well over 2 years old, all the optimizations that you're seeing, like the new Omni model, like it's almost a ship of Theseus problem now, right? Like that story, right? The ship that you leave a port with, guys know this, right? It's been, replaced so many times and optimized so many times. It's almost a completely different thing. And that's kind of how I look at O1. It's almost a completely different model, but yet it was based on that same pre-training run at its core.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of innovation still happening on that side of things. So I guess this is a long-winded way to say that my crystal ball is very, very foggy. But what I will say is that our hedonistic adaptation, meaning that when I tell all of you I have this magic thing in my pocket that you can take a picture or something and it can have an in-depth conversation with you about that. And the fact that it doesn't surprise you that I say that is just another example of how the market will start to expect that these technologies are baked into anything that's coming in the future for software. So in other words, am I going to put up with, just like would I go back to a rotary phone? No, right? I'm not going to do that. People with the Zero, I used to hate those guys. They had to, had to do this. And so it's in a similar way, we've all kind of really quickly adapted to what we consider normal and have our expectations set. And this puts a lot of pressure on us, right? We try to deliver first-party solutions into healthcare. Our market is expecting more of us. I think it's good expectations, but it also means that we have to deliver, and we have to deliver additional value on top of what you can get from things off the shelf.
Yeah, that's super insightful. Tell us a little bit about how Microsoft is approaching this, right? Microsoft has been part of the PC revolution, and then with the cloud revolution, providing end-to-end services. And now it looks like, even in the AI revolution, they are the front runners with the OpenAI partnership, with the Copilot. I've started using the Copilot a lot more, even when doing some basic queries, right? So tell us a little bit about how Microsoft is approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a really interesting opportunity. So like I sit in the healthcare and life sciences org, which if you remember, there was a acquisition of a company called Nuance Communications, if you've heard of that company, very large market share in sort of the speech to text space, and then they had a lot of other clinical workflow applications. And if you kind of look at the longer history of big tech in healthcare, it's not super star-studded, right? It's not a lot of wins, right? And there's been a lot of bites at the apple, so to speak, over the years. And it's not for lack of investment, and it's not for lack of a market and interest. But there was always this friction for me, like when even I was at Stanford interacting with big tech, it was always who on the other side understands healthcare. You can, take courses in it. You can have had a few rounds of being a sales rep in some health company, but to really understand it, you either need to have lived in the trenches with us or been in our shoes. And that was so vanishingly rare. And so to look over the other side of the table and have someone that understands the complexities and the incentive structures and the pain points, it's hard to do. And so I think until the Nuance acquisition, where we now have 1,000+ workforce that is now intermingling with the typical cloud and AI folks, now we start to see, and this is kind of what I do, I spend a lot of time, what is the cool new thing that's coming either from the research side or the cloud side? And then how does that fix a problem over here in healthcare? But then the other direction, what are the problems that are ready to be solved in healthcare? How do I find the right technology? That technology may not come from the health side. It could come from Xbox for all I know. But that cross corporate communication, I find, is the most valuable thing that we bring. So as a philosophy, though, it's not that everything is going to come out from us and you have to consume that. I think there's this very robust third-party ecosystem, and that's part of being the cloud. And that's really the interesting balance between the first party, what things are we competent and experts and best at delivering, and what things do we need to use and create to enable the startup ecosystem or our big strategic partners, about Epic. How do we start to just deliver all of this, either technology or know-how, into the ecosystem so that everybody wins? I mean, it's not a zero-sum game in my mind. It really is. We all want to genuinely solve the issues that we face in healthcare. And to have the empathetic understanding of, I've been in your shoes kind of a feeling, I think makes a huge difference in building the right things.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. I think we're going to shift gears a little bit now. As you heard from Matt, Microsoft is taking a very platform-centric approach for a variety of different healthcare and life sciences use cases.